Music bands have been around for a long time. Many forms and versions of bands have come and gone, but today bands seem to be in decline in pop and mainstream music. I'm talking about modern bands that were once plentiful like back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s and the 90s that seem to be in decline in the last 20 years or so. What changed? What caused the decline of such? In this video, we're going to explore what led to the disappearance of the modern band from rock to R&B. Hey, welcome to the Swag and Jazzy channel, the channel of all things music, learning, inspiration, and travel. So today we're going to talk about this topic about the disappearance of the modern band in mainstream and pop music. But before we get into that, let's talk about the word band itself. Where does the word band come from? What does it mean? And I think we need to bring clarity to that because over the past 20 something years, the word band has been used interchangeably to describe what a band is. And in my opinion, some people use the word to describe certain musical groups as a band when actually, in my opinion, they're not. Anyway, we'll see what you think, and you can add your 2 cents in the comments. So the word band comes from the French Middle language, or the Middle French word, I should say, called bande. And bande means band, group, gang, or troop. So out of those 4 choices that came out of the Middle French word bande, the word band was chiefly selected to describe an ensemble of musicians playing chiefly woodwind, brass, and percussion instruments in order to contrast them from the orchestra, which contains string instruments. So much for the history lesson. Let's move forward. So when the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s came about, record companies relied on the musician to create music. Now, back in those decades, sampling may have existed, but it wasn't as easily accessible as it is today, considering that the technology was not as available and was not as advanced back then. So the record companies had to rely on the musician or a group of individuals who can come together to create music on tangible instruments. And because record companies had to rely pretty much on the musician to create music, that gave musicians a lot of creative power as to being able to foster their creativity. A lot of the bands of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s wrote their own material, and they pretty much had free reign as to what they wanted to produce and perform and create. Now, mind you, of course, back then you couldn't just do anything you wanted to because there was censorship and all that, because we were still pretty much dependent on the radio. So you couldn't be too explicit. You could be, but you couldn't be that way in public. I mean, if you put something on a record, yes, you would have to buy the record to hear it, but it wouldn't be played for public consumption. Now, a funny thing happened in the late 80s and all of the 1990s. The record company geniuses there, I ain't gonna call them geniuses, but let's call them little grubby people who want to get their hands on a lot of money, got an idea of wanting to cater to a certain demographic type of girl. Not this type of girl, but this type of girl. And hence you have the emergence of the boy bands and the starting decline of bands being involved in pop and mainstream music creativity. The record label company factor. For this was intentional for music managers and record label executives who were striving for total control over artists. which included the creative process. In other words, they wanted to write for you, tell you what to sing, and how to dance to what you sing. Hence the start of the machine, factory-produced music, and persona. With the emergence of the boy bands, or should I say the boy vocal groups, and girls such as these were relying on their consumption of music through other avenues besides the radio. Avenues such as MTV, VH1 videos, or other music video-like channels. So the record executives had a winning formula. Get a group of pretty boys who didn't have to play instruments, who only had to have average singing ability, and who were hungry for fame and attention. The record executives tried to employ this formula to already sign and emerging bands that were on their labels. But in the process of trying to do so, they were taking away the band's power to write and create music on their own. For example, Don't Wanna Miss a Thing by Aerosmith wasn't written by Aerosmith, but Diane Warren. Now, of course, you can only imagine some bands didn't take too well to this new way of doing business and the way record companies were starting to manipulate artists and creators. And if a band member didn't comply with this new way of doing business, and or if the record execs did not like a particular band member, they would be replaced. Record executives started to see band members as Hollywood thinks of writers, commodities. Factor number 2 that led to the decline of bands being involved in today's mainstream and pop music genre was the advances of technology in music. Along with the formula for record executives to have more creative control over music artists, the advancements in music technology further ostracized bands in the pop and mainstream music arena. With inventions such as auto-tunes, drum machines, synthesizers, and other sampling devices, the need for bands in creating music became less and less, and record executives took full advantage of the new innovations and technology that was being offered. Studios that were once welcoming places for bands used to look like this, were now looking like this. One person could sit isolated at a desk and create track after track, producing a whole album. Less personnel were needed in the creating process, and therefore less dependency on individual band members to collaborate in making music. The decline of bands in the pop and mainstream music arena must have really gotten bad when the 2000s came about. Even Adam Levine of Maroon 5 made the following comment during a 2018 interview. I feel like there aren't any bands anymore. I feel like they're a dying breed in the pop limelight. When somebody as big as Adam Levine speaks on that, and also a music insider, he can see things we can't see, that speaks volumes to me in terms of the decline of bands in pop and mainstream music. Factor number 3, generational attitudes in creating music. I'll share with you something personal. I am the last of the baby boomers, and I've seen a lot come and go in terms of music, types of music, emerging new ideals in music. And I can tell you this: the majority of the music that was being sampled in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s came from bands of the baby boomer generation and Generation X. With every new generation that comes about, what comes with it is new ideologies and new technologies. And the new ideologies and technologies will shape that particular generation. For example, there was once a generation that didn't have electricity. But then there was a generation that did have electricity. Well, the generation who was able to have the electricity moved a little bit differently than those who did not have electricity. So with generation baby boomer, the baby boomer generation, and Generation X, of course, we didn't have all the technology that the generations of today have. So we were forced to socialize to create music. We had to collaborate with other people. A lot of the music that was created back by the baby boomer generation and Generation X were primarily done in garages, parents' basements, in the backyard, wherever people can congregate and collaborate to make music. That's how it was done back then. But today's generation, whether it be Generation Z, A, I can't even keep up with the letters anymore, so forgive me. Their approach to creating music is a lot different, and mainly it's more so of a in an isolated bubble, if you will. And that's okay. You know, I'm not comparing, saying one generation is better than the other here, but that's just the way it is. But also the way music is being created today by today's generation has also led to the decline of bands, actual bands, being part of the mainstream and pop music genre. At the time when this video was being produced, Spotify and the Billboard charts posted their top 10 acts, and here are a few of them that was listed at the time where this video was being made. As you can see, there are no bands mentioned, and I even scrolled down to the top 50. There was no mention of any bands. And I dug a little deeper, and I even noticed that the boy bands and girl bands that the Rucker executives had started to utilize were no longer being listed on the charts either. So what does all this mean? What this means is that it is what it is, and we have to accept whatever this generation gives us. But that doesn't mean that we cannot support the bands that are out there. There are bands out there. There are bands out there. And of course, they don't get the notoriety that they deserve. But what we can do as music consumers, we can support these bands. So what I try to do, and I did this last night, find a local music venue in your area. They all have websites. Check to see what music is being played on any given Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, or during a weekday. Go out and support the local bands that come to your town. I think that's one of the ways that we can keep the musicianship alive in bands, to keep it going. I love watching the band. As a matter of fact, I saw a band last night, the Wooten Brothers, and here's a little excerpt of their performance. So anyway, that concludes the video. I would challenge you to find a venue in your neck of the woods, your area, that solicits live band music, and take yourself out and treat yourself and support these bands, the local bands and the ones that come to your town. So anyway, that concludes the video. Please give this video a like if you like it, and please leave a comment if you so desire. And also, if you do go out and visit a venue in your neck of the woods that has live music, share it here on this video. Put it in the comments. Let us know what your experience was like. And please, 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 please hit that subscribe button, because I need some subscribers in order for me to keep doing this. Peace and blessings to you. Take care of yourself, and keep listening and making music.